In 1933, 1 out of every 4 American men had no job, no paycheck, no safety net. Families did not starve because the government saved them. They survived because grandmothers and grandfathers knew things we have completely forgotten. Number 18 on this list was so effective that food companies had to invent a product just to replace it. And number 7 was recently tested by engineers who called it shockingly superior to modern alternatives. These 25 skills kept families fed, warm, and alive when the entire economy collapsed. And here is what nobody tells you. Most of them still work better than anything you can buy at Walmart today. Before we start, hit that subscribe button because this list might change how you run your household. Number 25, reading the sky for weather. Before the Weather Channel, before your phone told you it might rain at 2 p.m., Depression-era families read the sky the way you read a text message. A ring around the moon meant rain within 48 hours. Red sky at morning meant storms were coming from the west. When leaves on oak and maple trees flipped to show their silver undersides, a hard rain was less than an hour away. Farmers and homesteaders staked their entire harvest on these observations, and they were right far more often than they were wrong. A 2011 study from Penn State confirmed that many traditional weather indicators correlate with actual atmospheric changes at a rate above 70%. That ring around the moon is caused by ice crystals in high cirrus clouds, the exact kind that precede a warm front. Your great-grandmother did not know the science, but she knew what it meant. She pulled the laundry off the line, covered the garden, and sent the children to gather firewood before the first drop fell. Today we check an app that is wrong half the time and act surprised when we get soaked. She never got soaked. She read the sky. Number 24, saving and rendering lard. Every hog killed during the Depression produced pounds of raw fat, and no family threw it away. Women cut the leaf fat into small cubes, dropped them into a heavy iron kettle, and rendered it low and slow over a wood fire until the fat turned to pure white liquid. Strained through cheesecloth and cooled in crocks, that lard went into everything: pie crusts, fried potatoes, biscuits, soap. A single hog could produce 30 to 40 pounds of lard, enough to last a family 6 months. By the mid-1930s, Crisco launched massive advertising campaigns telling housewives that vegetable shortening was cleaner and more modern. Sales doubled between 1935 and 1940, but lard from pastured pigs contains more vitamin D than almost any other food, has less saturated fat than butter, and makes a pie crust that Crisco has never matched. Your great-grandmother rendered lard because she had to. She kept rendering it because nothing worked better. Number 23, regrowing vegetables from scraps. When you could not afford seeds, you grew food from garbage. The bottom inch of a celery stalk placed in a shallow dish of water on the windowsill would sprout new leaves within a week. Green onion roots did the same. Potato eyes went straight into the dirt. Lettuce stumps, carrot tops for greens, even sweet potato slips started in a jar of water. Depression-era families turned kitchen scraps into functioning gardens without spending a single cent on seed packets. County extension agents published pamphlets in 1934 encouraging families to maintain scrap gardens as a supplement to relief rations. A family in Oklahoma could stretch a 5-cent bunch of green onions into a year-round supply just by replanting the roots. Today we throw away the parts that grow and buy new ones every week. Your great-grandmother would look at your trash can and see a garden. Number 22, flour sack clothing. When flour companies realized rural families were using cotton sacks to make dresses and shirts, they began printing the sacks with colorful patterns. By 1939, companies like Bemis and Percy Kent were hiring textile designers to create floral prints, specifically so mothers would buy their brand. A 100-pound sack yielded enough fabric for a child's dress. 3 sacks made a woman's house dress. Families saved and traded sacks to get matching patterns. The cotton was sturdy, it became soft after a few washes, and it was more durable than cheap, ready-made clothes from the 5 and dime. Mothers cut patterns from newspaper, pinned them to the fabric, and sewed by hand or on a treadle singer that ran without electricity. A family of 6 could be clothed for the cost of their baking supplies. The skill was not just sewing, it was seeing potential in something everyone else considered trash. Number 21, making soap from wood ash and fat. Soap was a luxury many families could not afford during the worst years, so they made their own soap. Wood ash from the cooking fire was collected in a barrel, and water was poured through it to create lye. That lye was mixed with saved cooking grease and boiled in a kettle outdoors until it saponified into a thick, harsh but effective soap. The whole process took 2 days and smelled terrible, but one batch produced enough soap to last months. The bars cleaned everything: clothes, dishes, skin, floors. Families who could not spare the grease made do with ash water alone for scrubbing. This was not a charming homestead project. This was survival hygiene when a bar of ivory cost a nickel that you did not have. The skill required precise ratios. Too much lye in the soap burned skin. Too little and it stayed greasy and would not clean. Grandmothers measured by feel, by the way the mixture sheeted off a wooden spade, and they got it right every single time. Number 20, darning socks and mending clothes. Nobody threw away a sock with a hole in it. Mothers stretched the sock over a wooden darning egg, threaded a needle with yarn, and wove a patch directly into the fabric, row by row, creating a grid that was nearly as strong as the original knit. A single pair of socks could be darned a dozen times before it was finally retired as a cleaning rag. Children learned to mend before they learned to cook. Every shirt, every pair of trousers, every apron was patched and repatched until it could not hold another stitch. A 1936 survey by the Bureau of Home Economics found that rural families spent less than $15 a year on clothing for the entire household. The rest was mending. The skill saved more money than almost anything else on this list because clothing was one of the biggest expenses a family faced. Today, a pair of socks costs $2, and we throw them away the moment a toe pokes through. Your great-grandmother made hers last 5 years. Between July and October, the kitchen became a factory. Mothers stood over boiling water baths for 12 hours a day, processing tomatoes, green beans, corn, peaches, pickles, jams, and anything else the garden produced. A family might put up 500 jars in a single season. Those jars lined basement shelves like a savings account you could eat. The USDA estimated in 1935 that a family with a good canning operation could cut their annual food bill by 40%. Mason jars were reused year after year. Lids were the only recurring expense, and the food lasted through winter and into spring. Pressure canners handled meat and low-acid vegetables safely. The knowledge of proper processing times and sealing was passed from mother to daughter with the seriousness of a medical procedure, because getting it wrong meant botulism. But families who canned well ate well, even in January, even in 1933, even when the bank had taken the farm. First pattern break. Here is where things get serious. The icebox was not a figure of speech. Before electric refrigeration reached rural America, in 1930, only 8% of farms had electricity. Families kept food cold with actual blocks of ice. An iceman delivered 25 to 50-pound blocks by horse-drawn wagon, and housewives placed them in insulated wooden cabinets lined with tin. The ice lasted 2 to 3 days in summer if you kept the door shut. Drip pans had to be emptied twice a day or the kitchen floor flooded. Families planned their cooking around the ice schedule. Monday was wash day. Tuesday was ironing. The day the iceman came was the day you cooked the meat that needed to stay cold. Leftovers were eaten in strict order of spoilage. Nothing sat, nothing waited. The entire household ran on a schedule dictated by melting ice. When you hear people complaining about meal planning, remember that your great-grandmother meal planned around a block of ice that was actively disappearing. Number 17, making vinegar from apple scraps. Apple cores and peels that modern families throw in the compost became vinegar. Scraps went into a crock with water and a little sugar, covered with cheesecloth, and left in a warm corner for 4 to 6 weeks. Wild bacteria turned the sugars to alcohol and then to acetic acid. The result was raw apple cider vinegar, months before anyone put it on a wellness blog. That vinegar cleaned windows, preserved vegetables, treated sore throats, and dressed salads. It cost nothing. A family with a single apple tree could produce gallons of it every fall. The mother of vinegar, that thick rubbery disc that formed on the surface, was saved and shared with neighbors to start new batches. Today, a bottle of Bragg's costs $6. Your great-grandmother made it from garbage. Commercial yeast was expensive and not always available in rural areas, so families kept sourdough starters alive, sometimes for years, feeding them flour and water like a pet. That bubbling crock of wild yeast produced bread, pancakes, biscuits, and even cake. A starter could travel. Families moving west during the Dust Bowl carried their starter in a jar, wrapped in a blanket to keep it warm. Some starters were passed down through 3 generations. The bread it made was tangy, chewy, and stayed fresh longer than yeasted bread because natural acids slowed mold growth. A family with flour, water, salt, and a living starter never went without bread. No store needed. No yeast packets, just patience and the knowledge of how to keep a culture alive. Number 15, trapping and snaring small game. When you could not afford ammunition and the grocery store was 20 miles of dirt road away, you set snares. Boys as young as 8 learned to build rabbit snares from baling wire, positioning them along fence lines and brush rows where cottontails traveled at dawn. A single rabbit could feed a family of 4 when stretched with potatoes and onions in a stew. Squirrel, possum, and groundhog were not novelties. They were Tuesday dinner. Families in Appalachia and the rural South depended on trapped game to supplement gardens and meager pantries. Trap lines were checked every morning before school. The skill required patience, observation, and a knowledge of animal behavior that no classroom taught. The skill was about survival. By 1940, commercial meat production had made trapping unnecessary for most families, but during the worst years, the difference between eating and going hungry was a 10-year-old boy who knew how to set a wire loop on a rabbit trail. Wood was not free. Even if you cut it yourself, the labor of felling, splitting, and stacking was enormous, so nobody let a fire die if they could help it. At night, mothers banked the coals by pushing them together, covering them with a thick layer of ash, and closing the damper to starve the oxygen. Done right, those coals would still be glowing 10 hours later. A handful of kindling and a puff of air brought the fire back to life without wasting a single match. The skill saved hours of labor and precious matches, which cost money. A family burning 5 cords of wood a winter could not afford to restart a fire from scratch every morning. Banking the fire also kept the house from dropping below freezing overnight. Children slept under quilts piled 3 deep, but the banked stove kept the kitchen warm enough that the water bucket did not ice over. It was a small skill with enormous consequences. Number 13, quilting from scraps. No fabric was purchased for quilts. Every piece came from worn-out clothing, feed sacks, or fabric scraps traded with neighbors. Women cut precise shapes from whatever they had, piecing together patterns that turned rags into blankets. A single quilt might contain fabric from a daughter's outgrown dress, a father's ruined work shirt, and a neighbor's old curtains. Quilting bees brought women together in winter, stitching and talking while children played underfoot. The quilts were not decorative, they were survival. Families in uninsulated houses piled 4 or 5 quilts on each bed when temperatures dropped below 0. Batting was made from raw cotton or carded wool, Even the smallest triangle of fabric found its place. A well-made quilt lasted 20 years. The women who made them carried an entire textile engineering education in their heads without ever calling it that. Number 12, egg preservation in water glass. Spring hens laid more eggs than a family could eat, but winter hens barely laid at all. The solution was water glass, a sodium silicate solution that sealed eggshells and preserved them for 6 months or longer without refrigeration. Mothers mixed 1 part water glass with 9 parts boiled and cooled water in a stone crock, then carefully lowered fresh, unwashed eggs into the solution. The sodium silicate plugged the pores in the shell, preventing bacteria and air from entering. By December, when the hens had stopped laying, the family still had eggs for baking and breakfast. A quart of water glass cost 15 cents and preserved up to 15 dozen AGS. The eggs were not quite as good as fresh for frying, but for cakes, custards, and scrambles, they were indistinguishable. This skill vanished almost overnight when rural electrification brought refrigerators in the late 1940s. But for 2 decades, water glass was the reason farm families had eggs in January. Second pattern break. Now here is something the history books leave out. Depression-era families did not just preserve food, they preserved knowledge. Recipe cards, handwritten in pencil on the backs of envelopes, circulated through communities like currency. A woman who knew how to make head cheese from a hog's head or how to cure a ham with nothing but salt and smoke held knowledge worth more than money. Church cookbooks published in small towns during the 1930s contained techniques that food scientists are only now rediscovering. Fermentation, lactopreservation, low-temperature smoking were all documented in plain language by women who never set foot in a laboratory. When we lost those recipe cards, we lost an entire library of survival knowledge. Modern cookbooks tell you what to buy. Depression-era recipe cards told you how to survive. Hog killing day in November was the most important day of the year. The meat had to be preserved or it would rot before Christmas. Hams and shoulders were packed in salt for 6 weeks, then hung in the smokehouse over smoldering hickory for days. The smoke deposited antimicrobial compounds on the surface, while the salt drew moisture from the interior, creating an environment where bacteria could not survive. A properly smoked ham lasted a full year, hanging in a cool, dry room. No refrigeration, no vacuum sealing, no freezer. Families built small smokehouses from whatever lumber they had. The best ones ran continuously for a week. The smoke kept low and cool, so the meat cured without cooking. Side meat, jowls, and bacon went through the same process. A single 200-pound hog, properly butchered and cured, fed a family of 5 for an entire year. Too hot, and the meat cooked. Too little salt, and it spoiled. Grandmothers who got it right were respected like surgeons. Number 9, making do with one-pot meals. Depression-era cooking was not about recipes, it was about ratios. 1 part protein, 2 parts starch, whatever vegetables you had, and enough water to stretch it. Bean soup with a ham bone, potato soup thickened with flour, cornbread crumbled into buttermilk. Every meal came from 1 pot because fuel was expensive, and washing multiple pots wasted water carried from the well. A cast-iron Dutch oven did everything. It braised, baked, fried, and simmered. Women knew exactly how much water to add, so the meal did not scorch and did not turn to thin broth. 1 pot feeding 6 people 3 times a day required a kind of mathematics that no cookbook ever wrote down. You measured by hand, cooked by sound, and knew it was done by smell. You did not buy seeds every spring. You saved them from this year's harvest for next year's planting. Tomato seeds were fermented in their own juice for 3 days, then rinsed and dried on newspaper. Bean pods were left on the vine until they rattled, then shelled and stored in glass jars. Corn ears were hung by the husk in a dry shed. Families kept seed lines going for decades, selecting the strongest plants year after year, creating varieties perfectly adapted to their specific soil and climate. A 1937 United States Department of Agriculture bulletin encouraged seed saving as a patriotic duty during hard times. The practice was free. It produced better adapted crops than store-bought seed, and it gave families independence from the seed catalog that might not arrive if the postal route was cut. Today, we buy hybrid seeds that cannot reproduce true to type, spending money every spring on something your great-grandmother got for free. Number 7, building with found materials. When a barn blew down, the lumber built a chicken coop. When a neighbor tore out a fence, the posts became firewood and the wire became a rabbit pen. Nothing was purchased new if it could be salvaged. Families built entire outbuildings from reclaimed timber, flattened tin cans for roof patches, and used river stones for foundations. The skill was not just carpentry, it was vision. The ability to look at a pile of scrap and see a smokehouse, a root cellar, a hog pen. Engineers from Texas A&M tested Depression-era construction techniques in 2019 and found that many joinery methods, particularly hand-cut mortise and tenon joints, exceeded the sheer strength of modern nailed connections. Your great-grandfather built things that lasted 80 years with no power tools and no trip to Home Depot. He built them with what he found and what he knew. Number 6, root cellaring. Before refrigerators and freezers, the root cellar kept a family alive from November to April. Dug into a hillside or beneath the house, the cellar maintained temperatures between 32 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, using nothing but the Earth's natural insulation. Potatoes, carrots, turnips, beets, cabbage, and apples stored properly lasted 5 months or longer. Apples were wrapped individually in newspaper to prevent one rotten fruit from spoiling the barrel. Potatoes were kept in complete darkness to prevent greening. Cabbages were pulled up root and all and hung upside down from the rafters. The knowledge of what to store where was as precise as any refrigeration manual. A well-stocked root cellar held 500 pounds of produce. That was the difference between a family that ate through winter and one that did not. Number 5, bartering skills and labor. Cash was scarce, but everyone had something to trade. A woman who could sew traded dresses for eggs. A man who could fix engines traded labor for firewood. Entire communities ran on barter systems that kept everyone fed, even when no one had money. The local doctor in small towns often accepted chickens and vegetables as payment for house calls. A 1934 report from the Federal Emergency Relief Administration documented barter networks operating in every state, some involving hundreds of families exchanging goods and services without a single dollar changing hands. The skill was not just trading, it was knowing what your labor was worth and maintaining relationships built on mutual dependence. Money could disappear overnight, skills could not. Number 4, foraging wild foods. Dandelion greens were not a weed. They were the first fresh vegetable of spring after months of root cellar potatoes and canned goods. Families gathered dandelion, poke salad, lamb's quarters, and wild onions from fields and roadsides. Children picked blackberries and wild plums in summer. Hickory nuts and black walnuts were gathered in fall. Mushroom hunting required knowledge passed down carefully because a mistake could be fatal. But families who knew their local plants added hundreds of calories and critical vitamins to their diet without spending anything. Dandelion greens contain more vitamin A than carrots and more calcium than milk. Your great-grandmother served them wilted with bacon grease and vinegar. Now we spray dandelions with poison. She ate them. When wheat flour was too expensive, corn kept families alive. Cornbread, corn pone, hush puppies, grits, mush, and hoe cakes all came from the same sack of cornmeal that cost 10 cents for 5 pounds. Mothers made cornmeal mush for breakfast, fried the leftover slices for lunch, and baked cornbread for supper, a single ingredient stretched across every meal of the day. In the rural South, some families ate corn in one form or another at every meal for months. The grain was filling, cheap, and could be grown on marginal land where wheat would not survive. Corn was dried on the cob, shelled by hand, and taken to the local grist mill where it was ground between stones. The whole grain meal that came back contained oils and nutrients that modern degerminated cornmeal from the grocery store has been stripped of. Your great-grandmother's cornbread tasted different because it truly was. It was food made from local corn, grown, dried, and ground within 5 miles of her kitchen. No family survived the Depression alone. When a barn burned, neighbors rebuilt it in a day. When a mother was sick, other women cooked for the family. When a crop failed, the church took up a collection of whatever people could spare. Jars of green beans, sacks of flour, a smoked ham. This was not charity. It was insurance. Everyone knew their turn would come. Mutual aid societies, church groups, and informal neighbor networks kept entire communities from collapse. A 1936 study from the University of North Carolina documented rural communities where no family went hungry despite average incomes below $200 a year, entirely because of organized sharing networks. The skill was not just generosity. It was the ability to ask for help without shame, to give without keeping score, and to maintain a web of obligation that held everyone together. Money could disappear overnight, but a community that looked after its own could survive anything. Number 1, stretching a meal to feed one more. This was the skill that mattered most, and it had no recipe. It was the instinct to add another potato to the pot when a neighbor's child showed up at supper time. It was the knowledge that a cup of water and a handful of flour could turn thin soup into something that stuck to your ribs. It was the refusal to let anyone leave the table hungry, even when there was barely enough. Mothers served everyone else first and ate whatever was left, sometimes nothing but broth and bread. They did not complain. They did not announce what they were doing. They just did it quietly, meal after meal, year after year. This skill was not about cooking. It was about character. It was the Depression's greatest lesson, that survival is not individual, but collective, that feeding someone else when you have almost nothing is not weakness, but the deepest kind of strength. Every other skill on this list supported this one: the garden, the canning, the foraging, the mending, the bartering. All of it existed so that when someone knocked on the back door at supper time, there was always enough. Try one of these this week. Save your vegetable scraps and regrow them. Start a sourdough culture. Learn to darn a sock. Then tell me in the comments if your great-grandmother was just old-fashioned or if she knew something we forgot. I have been saving bacon grease in a jar on my counter for 3 months now, and my cooking has never been better. Share which skill you are going to bring back. I want to know if seed saving gets more love than cornmeal. These were not quaint hobbies. They were the skills that kept families alive when everything else failed. Your great-grandparents knew. Now you know too.